Good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the channel. Hi, I'm Jim Surratt, host of the Hammer Strength and Conditioning YouTube channel and podcast, which has died recently, but I'm trying to resurrect. So here we are, right? So today I wanted to talk a little bit about, mainly because I haven't done a video in quite some time, wanted to talk about a not new in the sense of like I created it, right? But new to me, or new to my programming sort of methodology of getting in conditioning at the same time as lifting, right? So for those of you who are not familiar, and for those of you who are, forgive me for this, sort of explanation, but for those of you who are not familiar with how I run things, I use the conjugate method. So I typically train on a 4-day split. Day 1 is max effort lower. Day 2 is repetition upper. Day 3 is an off day. Day 4 is a dynamic effort, sort of volume-based lower day, and day 5 is a max effort upper day, right? So that's again on a traditional 5-day week, especially a 5-day duty week for the population I work with, the operators, the tactical operators. But anyway, so one thing that I had a conversation with my boss, who had a conversation with one of our sergeant majors, I think, or command sergeant majors, but one of the guys in charge, about sort of how things are executed these days when it comes to missions, right? So during the conflict in the Middle East, a lot of times it was like dudes would get dropped in on a helicopter, they'd helo in, they'd hit the objective, and then they would helo out, like in and out, bang, bang, right? The way that things run today, and again, I'm not an expert on military operations or combat by any means, so please don't take anything that I say as gospel and completely with a grain of salt. But from the conversation that my boss and this service member were having, this officer was having, is he an officer? Oh, he's an officer. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Based on the conversation that these two men were having, I came up with this idea of how do we as closely mimic the way in which operations are handled these days, right? So the conversation went something like, hey, the way that combat has evolved or operates these days is that guys will infill, like they'll ruck in for X amount of distance, they'll complete their objective, they'll hit the objective, and then they exfil out on foot, right? So it's not this like down and dirty, hard and fast, like helo in, hit your objective and helo out. It's not that anymore. So I was like, how do we do that here, right? And obviously I don't have the capacity or the time to mimic like a 12 or 20 mile ruck and then an objective and then a 12 or 20 mile ruck back out, right? I don't have that capacity. We don't have that amount of time, right? So I was like, how do I mimic that within the context of the time that I have available? So I came up with this idea on my dynamic effort lower days, which is a squat and a deadlift day, of an infill, operate, exfil protocol. So for the infill, basically it's like 15 minutes of whatever piece of machinery you choose. We have like ESD machinery or cardio machinery. We have here in the facility, we have incline treadmills, we have curved treadmills, we have assault bikes, we have stationary bikes, we have seated rowers, we have like ski ergs, and we have Versa climbers, right? So we have a number of different pieces of equipment that these guys can use. So I don't care what modality they choose, but what we do is we warm up, we do some plyos, some build-ups, that kind of stuff, so we get the body activated, warm, and ready to go. And we move into the cardio room where we perform 15 minutes of infill, right, at about a heart rate zone 3. So about 70 to 80%-ish, plus or minus, depending on which scale you're looking at, of your max heart rate. So, and then what they do is they mark down their distance, right? So they keep track of how far they got during that 15 minutes. And then what we do is we come back in and we immediately attack dynamic effort squats. So we'll warm up, we'll build up to, so this is week 3 of this cycle. So we're gonna build up to 60% of their max plus 80 pounds of chain total. So 2 chains per side of the bar. So today, again, week 3, 60%, 8 sets of 2 versus 80 pounds of chain. 30-second rest interval, so very high intensity, not necessarily high intensity by virtue of weight, but high intensity by virtue of sort of total tonnage moved, as well as the density of the session. So we do our squats and then we immediately move into deadlift. Same concept, but today we're doing 8 sets of 1 at 60% versus the 80 pounds of chain. And as soon as they finish that, as soon as they finish their final deadlift, again with that 30-second rest interval, as soon as they finish that, they strip their bar down real quick and we head back to the ESD room and we do a 15-minute exfil where they have to match their distance that they achieved on their infill, right? So if they, I'm gonna pick a number, right? Let's say they ran, 3 miles. Again, I'm just picking a number. If they ran 3 miles on the way in, they come in, they execute the operation, they squat, they deadlift, and then they have to match that 3 miles on the way back out. So what that means is that their heart rate elevates on the exfil as compared to the infill because one, they're already fatigued, but two, they're pushing themselves through that fatigue state to execute the same amount of distance that they achieved on their infill, right? Because that's how it works, right? At least in theory, right? Is that if there's an infill point, right? Where like a drop-off zone, it's like, hey, here's our infill point. And our objective is 15 miles from here. So I got to infill 15 miles. I have to execute my objective, and then I have to exfil that same amount of distance to, whether it's like a landing zone, a pickup zone, whatever it might be, right? Again, this is only week 3 of doing this protocol, but the feedback that I've gotten from operators and enablers as well. So the Green Berets the Green Berets and the support personnel have been very positive. A lot of dudes have really bought into it. They like hard stuff. Sometimes they do hard things just for the sake of the fact that they're hard. But it's been really successful so far. And I am going to continue to run it. This is week 3, so including this week, I have 7 more weeks of this program. So I'm very excited to see how it goes. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. Hopefully, if you are an aspiring or a current tactical strength and conditioning coach or a strength and conditioning coach in general or an operator, hopefully this can give you some insight into one potential way of sort of crafting and organizing your conditioning and your strength training, right? Because dynamic effort days aren't necessarily about strength, right? Because the percentages at which you're operating aren't high enough, in my opinion, to elicit a strength, like a true strength response. Obviously it's submaximal, so maybe like you could call it like functional strength or like strength endurance and that kind of stuff, right? But like a true dynamic effort day is not about building your maximal strength. It's about building work capacity. If you're looking at it from a powerlifting perspective, it's about bar speed, which doesn't matter so much in this arena, right? Yes, I care how fast they can move, but I don't care how fast they move the bar for the sake of how fast they move the bar, right? We're not powerlifters here. I'm a powerlifter. These guys are operators. So different strokes. Whereas your max effort days, that's where you put your strength work. That's where you develop your maximal strength and you get stronger. So the way that I've constructed and organized and scheduled this particular day is basically a 45-minute conditioning session across different heart rate zones. Zone 2, zone 3, and we're back down to about zone 2. Sometimes we stay in that zone 3 during the squats and deadlifts just by virtue of how fit an individual might be. Obviously, the more fit individuals, their heart rate drops faster, so they get into that zone 2 much more quickly, and they can stay there longer. Whereas like somebody who's less fit is going to stay up in that zone 3 and going to stay there much longer, and then push into that zone 4 potentially on their exfil, right? So yeah, just another interesting, novel sort of way of organizing training. Again, if you're a strength coach, whether tactical or sport, private, whatever it may be, hopefully this is beneficial to you. And if you are an operator or a service member or somebody who is looking to get into sort of the tactical field, whether it's first responder, military, or whatever it may be, hopefully this helps you. So thanks for checking in. And as always, do not waste the pain.